All right, so for our next and final phase of the 60 is our max speed portion. So we've made it through our start and our acceleration. Okay, so we've made it through 20, 25 yards. We're into our transition and then into our top speed phase. So um, as we make it to our top speed phase, well-trained athletes can typically hold their absolute max speed from anywhere from 10 to 20 yards, 20 yards being the absolute most. So if we do the quick math, we've made it through our start, acceleration and transition puts us about 25-ish, 30 yards. So we can hold our absolute top speed from 30 to 50 at max. Okay, and then that last 10 yards is more or less just hanging on. So that's why our technique becomes so important. So with our acceleration, obviously we were talking about keeping that forward lean, okay, and driving the foot back behind us underneath. And then as we get to our top speed, we slowly start to rise up to this vertical position. Okay, now more or less everything's the same. Okay, we're pulling up from the hip and driving back the foot to hopefully land directly underneath us. Okay, if our technique starts getting long, okay, we're creating that braking force. Okay, and we're exposing our hamstring to some injury, which is not going to be great. But let's focus more so on the brake. So if my foot's landing out front, I'm slowing myself down, and then I have to wait until my hip crosses the shoelaces before I can push. That's why we want to get tall, strike underneath. So we're at top speed. Okay, we want it to look more or less like this. We're going to be bouncing off the ground to be as efficient as possible, to hopefully maximize and get as close to holding that top speed for 20 yards as long as possible. That's going to be the biggest separator between an athlete who runs a 6.5 versus one that runs a 7.2. And that's why in our training we try to sprint 1 to 2 times a week max speed, with an emphasis on technique and absolute max effort. The emphasis on technique is just to make sure we're as efficient as possible, to make sure that we don't slow ourselves down unnecessarily. And then the max effort part of it is, if you think about someone who runs 21 miles per hour versus someone who runs 18 miles per hour, the person who runs 21 is covering 5 extra feet per second as compared to the guy who runs 18 miles per hour. So if you run 21 and let's say we get to 30 and that's when our max speed kicks in, over the course of the next 30 yards, you will finish 15 feet in front of that person who runs 18 miles per hour, which essentially equates to roughly around half a second. So once you get up to your max speed, we have to make sure that we maintain our technique, and then we have to make sure that we're training it leading into it, so that way our overall horsepower is higher than anybody else.